Hello, everyone. My name is Jonny Simkin. I'm the co founder and CEO of Swiftly. And today I'm really excited to be talking with Paul Comfort, who's the SVP and Chief Customer Officer at Modaxo. I'm sure many of us follow Paul on LinkedIn, following his travels around the world, talking with transit agency leaders and sharing best practices across the industry. So, Paul, really excited to have you and to be able to talk with you today.
Thanks. Likewise, Johnny. I respect you and the work you've done and can't wait to get into all these topics that are so important to our industry today.
Excellent. Well, we're going to cover a few topics and going to be covering a few different themes, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us.
It's fun.
So, the first topic, ridership, big key area of discussion across many in the industry. There are some macro trends happening with the economic potential recession, gas prices, obviously, COVID. And you've been traveling around the world talking with many agency leaders. And I was wondering, what are you observing across the industry in terms of ridership rebounding?
It's a good question. It is the topic du jour right now across the industry. I just got back from the Comto conference recently, and it was the talk of the town there as well. So here's what I see happening, right? So during the prior to the pandemic, ridership was the number one key performance indicator that most transit systems measured themselves objectively by. And you'd say like the system I used to run in Baltimore, MTA in Baltimore, where I was CEO, 121 million trips a year. That was our mantra. 120 million trips a year. And I always felt like, personally, having been in this industry now for more than 30 years, um, it was like a false idol we were worshiping at this false idol or altar of ridership because it's the one thing we can't really control. Why are we measuring our number one KPI about the one thing we really can't control, and that is how many people actually get on the bus? Instead, maybe we measure, our how we're improving the environment or how we're adding, access to jobs and all the other things that transit can do. So for me personally, it was very interesting and to watch most transit agencies realize, and politicians who fund us, and I'm a former politician, so I can say that, say, what, maybe ridership isn't the only thing that matters. Maybe transit agencies are doing other things than just A to B in the morning AM and the afternoon PM peak periods, but there's lots of other things that they can do. So it was satisfying to see people. It wasn't satisfying to see people not riding transit. Don't get me wrong. It's satisfying to see people change how they viewed things. And so when APTA did a survey, I think it was last year, ridership for the first time went down from number one to number two in the list of KPIs, right? And number one is customer satisfaction, because we know if we build it, maybe they'll come. Not always. So that's the context from which I come to this. Now, transit systems and the politicians that fund them still want to make sure that, why should I give you more money than last year if you're serving less people? That's a valid question. As a former county commissioner, I can say that, I can appreciate that. So we do need to get our ridership numbers back up. Unfortunately, on the commuter side, commuter train and commuter bus, um, it's not getting there. And so, commuter train services are still like 40% in a lot of cities from pre-pandemic levels. The mayor of New York just said the other day, we may not even really have a downtown business district anymore because of the hybrid work schedules that people are doing. So, you know what? It's like Lauren Skyver said to me many times, Paul, CEO of Sunline Transit, my good pal and career counselor, I call her. She says, if don't sell what they're not buying. And if they're not buying commuter train services, then we need to adjust what we're doing. And I've been talking to people from Australia to Canada, to Metrolinx and all these guys saying, maybe we don't need to call ourselves commuter rail anymore. Now, maybe we're regional rail. Maybe we pick up midday service to get people into the town to see museums and things that are open, nighttime and weekend service to go to ball games and nightlife, and not just have our only focus be on just on the commuter down to the big tall buildings in downtown. So a lot of transit agencies are heeding that. They're not just taking my advice necessarily, but they've come to that conclusion on their own. And so that's, I think, changing the focus of who we are is also changing the focus of how we provide that service is also a way to reach out to new customer base, right? Mom bringing her kids into town to ride the museum, maybe never thought of riding from the suburbs on the commuter train in. But if you market it to her, now you might have a new customer for life who doesn't ride every day, Monday to Friday, but is a more regular rider. And so it's a great way to kind of expand our base. When it comes to fixed route bus service, Jonny, it's great to see some cities back up to almost pre-pandemic levels. Cities like Richmond, Virginia, and I'm sure there's many other cities like that as well that have come up to 80% or close to it. I still think there's going to be a 20% gap for a while because of the hybrid nature of the work schedule. And so I think the new kind of like it's a new baseline. A lot of cities are trying to say, hey, we're at 80% of our pre, and that's pretty good. And it is pretty good right now, especially with, new scares coming up and all the things that are happening. So there's lots of ways people are doing it, but the number one way they're getting people back on the bus is by a focus on customers. I just did a talk at my old alma mater, MTA Baltimore, to their bus division, and they wanted me to talk about customer focus. How can we focus on what the customers want today? So people are rebooting their bus routes like we used to do with the Houston model, I called it, where we figure out where people want to go today and the times they want to go, and we adjust our fixed routes that way. The other big thing, I know we'll talk about it more in a minute, is the addition of microtransit. That's something new that's happened. And that is a model that people are paying for with the ARPA funds and the extra money they got from the feds. They're saying, oh, good, now we can pilot these new things. We got a little extra money. And they're seeing what works best. Last comment I'll make, and then we can have a conversation more about it, is I just got back from Dubai recently, and we actually did an episode of our Transit Unplugged TV show there that's on YouTube right now. And what I was fascinated about, Jonny, was how they're using taxi cabs as their city's microtransit. There's 11,500 cabs in Dubai. Many of them are actually, some of them are owned by the transit authority, but others aren't. But all of them they have hardware and software in them that allows the transit agency to actually include them as part of their fleet, and they can send vehicles there and they can move them around. One question is, why are we, trying to reinvent the wheel when most cities already have a taxi fleet there? Maybe there's a way to better integrate them into our overall mobility solution. So there's some thoughts on it.
Wow, so many great thoughts. I don't even know where to start to respond. A few really interesting things. I love how you talked about ridership dropping in terms of overall priority. It's interesting, right? It's a lagging indicator. If you focus on better customer satisfaction, more service reliability, higher frequency service, more tailored service to what riders need, that's ultimately going to then bring riders back. And so you might see ridership increase over time, but it's really as a result of doing a lot of other things. And I love your thoughts around changing commute patterns. I know I live in the Bay Area. I go to San Francisco quite a bit, and it's pretty crazy. When I go into the city, it's almost like a ghost town in the financial district where our office is at. There's still very little activity there. And so I think you bring up a great point that especially for commuter services, we're going to see huge changes on that front. Let's shift maybe to a slightly different topic that's also impacting ridership, which is the economy. There's a lot happening in terms of talk around a recession. There's a lot of activity with high gas prices. How do you see these impacting ridership, both for commuters, but also just for everyday users in some of the examples you spoke about?
Yeah. It's funny. My buddy Alberto Gonzalez, who owns Pulsar Advertising in LA, called me 6 months ago and said, maybe transit agencies ought to start promoting the fact that they are the low cost solution. This was when gas was only $3.25, and now in many places it's over $5 a gallon. And I agreed with him and said, yeah, I mean, this is our moment, to be honest with you. When gas gets expensive and the economy starts to crash or have a recession, and prices are high and people aren't making as much money, or their money isn't going as far because the value of the dollar isn't that much. Hey, man, you know, a lot of cities are still doing free transit coming out of COVID. And so this is our time to really accentuate that we are a great cost efficient alternative for people to get around. But again, I think it involves what Nat Ford taught us 4 or 5 years ago, which is we should, as transit agencies, not view ourselves as, the monopoly like we have been for 40 years, right? We had a monopoly since the 70s, since a lot of these old private bus systems went bankrupt and cities bought them up or took over their assets. Well, for 40 years, it's been all us, baby. It's just us. We are the mass transit provider. But now, over the last 10 years, there's lots of new companies coming in. The Uber's the list, but lots of other companies too that are providing other alternatives, scooters and autonomous vehicles, all that. Now, transit agencies, I think, have figured out that they need to shift their role and become the mobility aggregator, that we're pulling all these mobility options together. We're still the 800-pound gorilla in the room, right? So we're still the main person. That's why I like having, a mobility as a service app run by the transit agency like they do in Dallas, not necessarily letting a private company kind of take that into themselves, although they're free to use that data if they want to, obviously. So, yeah, I think that uh, economy problems and higher costs are a great way for transit to shine and to bring in new passengers, new people that maybe haven't tried us before. And if we've got new models like microtransit that may be of interest to people who used to be called choice riders, all the better.
Yeah, you bring up a great point around some of the newer entrants, right? Obviously ride hailing, Uber, Lyft, micromobility, Lime and Bird, and many other
Yes,
players on that front. How do you think that's impacted rider expectations? So there's a huge shift of agencies becoming more aggregators or of service, but also they're still operating a fundamentally important mode of public transit in the city. What's changed with rider expectations with a lot of these new private mobility options, and how do you think agencies can keep up?
that's great. It's a really good question because it definitely has shifted the expectations, right? So it requires transit agencies to not act like government lumbering giants, taking forever to move down the street. But they've had to become more market aware, which is a big key to attracting them. So, the first thing is I can see my car coming to me on my phone, and it tells me when it's going to get here. Right? That's the first thing that's different about Lyft and Uber and all those 7 or 8 years ago. And transit agencies said, oh, yeah, I need an app that people can see the bus coming. So they're not standing there just wondering, will it come? I remember I used to say in Baltimore when I got there, we need to improve our brand equity because we've been lying to people for 20 years. We've told them the bus is going to be there at 7 a.m. It's not there at 7 a.m. It may not be there at 7:10 a.m. It may not be there at all. The run may have been cut, and there's no way to let our passengers know that. And so just real time information, Jonny, is one of the big changes that have come there. The second one is more individualized service, right? I want it to come when I want it to come, but also where I want it to come. I don't necessarily want to have to walk down 6 blocks to get to a bus stop. So it's the time and it's the location, but it's also the personalized service. And so these are all ways that transit agencies are having to kind of update and get themselves into the 21st century and get out of this 1980s technology that so many of us have been stuck with for the last 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, you bring up such great points, and it definitely mimics what we've observed too, right? Riders, you open Uber, Lyft, any other app in real time, you see where vehicles are, you know exactly what your experience is going to be like. You can even rate rides after the trip, importing a lot of those expectations into the public sector. So, vehicles, you see them move on the map every few seconds instead of jumping 3 city blocks at a time.
Right, right.
Such an important change on the horizon. All right, great topic on ridership. We're now going to shift to something that I think is top of mind for many, and that is around operator and staff shortages. So we've seen throughout the pandemic, not just public transit agencies, but really a bunch of industries have been impacted as far as attracting and retaining staff, and especially in the public transit industry, there's been a big shortage of operators to drive vehicles. What do you think agencies can do to best address this? What have you seen work? What have you seen not work?
Yeah, great topic for discussion, and it is the second, I would say, topic du jour that's on everyone's minds now. For context, Jonny, I think everybody knows this already, but I think it's important for us to reflect for a moment. This COVID pandemic has been unlike anything we have ever experienced in the last millennia. I'm not aware of anything that has brought every nation in the world together the way COVID has. World War II, That brought a lot of the nations together to fight something, but it broke apart the world because half the world was against the other half of the world. This brought us all together, and it forced everyone to do something that they haven't been forced to do before, which is stay home, and stay home for long periods of time. And so that has changed, to use that same word again, the expectations that people had. Companies have realized I can do a lot of my work without all that expensive real estate in downtown Manhattan. Or wherever, right? I can have a lot of I remember the company I work for, Trapeze. I remember walking in our headquarters before this and seeing, 100 people sitting at computers typing. They were programmers. I went around and shook everybody's hand. I had Paul Comfort. What are you working on? I'm the vice president. They would tell me, now they've all been working from home for 2 years. Do you think they're going to want to come back 5 days a week to sit back, there when they can be doing it from home with their cat, on their shoulder and drinking coffee from their own coffee mug and all that? So the same thing has happened with the public transit industry when it comes to drivers. Like, where is everybody? So during the pandemic, it's not just drivers, it's skilled mechanics too, to be honest with you. That's a big need. A lot of guys my age in their early 50s, hit their 30 years, man. They're 25 or 30 years as mechanics, especially. And they said, you know what? I'm taking this opportunity to take my pension, get out, and I'll get a gig job on the side. I'll work for my cousin Vinny down the street at his shop, and do part-time work. So it's affected mechanics. It's affected a lot of staff, drivers especially. Here's what I'm hearing. And I've really dug into this recently at a bunch of conferences, talked to a lot of transit agencies, and asked them, what do you see as solutions? I've written articles about it. So people don't want to do a lot of people don't want to do the 8-hour shift, nights, weekends, all the stuff that's required when you first become a brand new bus driver. You get the worst shifts because of the way the collective bargaining agreements give the people with the most seniority the best shifts. So they get the Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift. And then you, as the new driver, get the 3 p.m. to midnight shift, Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday, and sometimes. If you're sitting at home and during the pandemic you were collecting $45,000 with unemployment and all your other benefits, and you were like, "Hey, I can do with this," plus all your other benefits, and now you may have lost some of that federal unemployment, but you figured out other gig jobs on the side. It's hard to get people that want to come in, get in a uniform, come 20 minutes early, get checked out, sent out in a vehicle, told what to do. So that's another reason why I think the rise of paratransit style microtransit is really taking off, because it's the gig economy. Companies like Uber and Lyft and Silver Ride or Userve, these companies they're like adaptive TNCs. They're not having as much trouble getting drivers because they can have Aunt Susie come, who only wants to work, during the 3 hours while her child is in daycare in the morning, and she can come out and do 3 hours from her own car, pick the own trips she wants. And so I think this aggregating role is now becoming very practical as well. We need some of these other companies to be part of our overall mobility mosaic because we just aren't getting the drivers. I mean, most transit agencies have raised their driver wages dramatically. I've heard of things like $6-7 an hour jumps in starting salary for drivers, and they're
Wow.
still not getting it. I was down in Miami with Ulysses Cleckley. He said, "Paul, I've been trying to hire 200 drivers for 6 months. We get 10 in, and then some leave out the door on the other end." And so I was in Boston with the CEO of MBTA, and he told me, "Paul, I've got 1,000 vacancies in my agency, a big hunk of which are drivers, and we just can't get it." And so big agencies, small agencies, it's all the same. It's very difficult to get them in unless we give them flexibility, which is difficult to do for drivers because of the nature of the work. You can't do it from home, and the nature of the scheduling, which is, we're going to honor seniority. It's just going to be that way. And so we're boxed in there. It's a very difficult. So you got to think of all kinds of other value added propositions that you can give drivers, right? That could be things like, extra benefits you're giving people, paying for tuition, all that kind of stuff that maybe normally you wouldn't have given to drivers. You've given that to staff, but now you need to think creatively.
You bring up such a great series of points on this topic, and flexibility clearly is going to be a theme of the future, right? We're seeing it across every single industry, and especially public transit on the operator side because of what you described. Normally, the newer operators are going to get worse shifts, and then they're going to demand more flexibility. And so it's really hard to keep up with that from a pay perspective, even though a lot of agencies are increasing pay. Just flexibility is more important for many people.
Right.
Let's now shift to microtransit. and on-demand transit. You've alluded to this quite a bit. A lot of movement on this in this space. A lot of new players, Via, Spare Labs, Rideco, many other players are partnering. Obviously, Trapeze partnering with agencies across the country to implement on-demand services. Do you think this trend is here to stay?
I do. Yeah, my buddy Dick Alexander's over there now at Rideco. So yeah, I think it is on-demand transportation, but like anything new, it has to find its place, right, Johnny? I mean, so um, I was thinking about this last night when I was thinking about these topics and what I might talk about today about them. So right now there's some extra spare money that people have because of the money that came from Washington D.C. and these three acts. You know, the first one was the CARES Act and the CRISA Act, which helped the big agencies, and now the ARPA, which has funded a lot of transit agencies, and they're doing new things with it. So they're trying it now. It's a great opportunity for people to try something new. When that money runs out, only the things that have been thrown against the wall that stick will stay there, right? And so it's just like an autonomous vehicle, the same kind of new technology. You got to figure out where it fits. You know, an 11 passenger autonomous vehicle is not going to work in the downtown district of your city to pull commuters in, but it might work in a campus shuttle transportation. In the heat of San Antonio, getting people from the parking lots 24 hours a day back and forth to campus buildings at a college or a business. So it's finding the right role. Microtransit could be used to open up um, some areas that are considered transit deserts where there's nothing there. I know that's what our friend in Las Vegas is doing. MJ Maynard, she's tried to use microtransit to go out to places where they haven't had transit before. It could also be used as you're moving your routes around. You may say, well, we don't need the route on this road because it doesn't meet the standard that we've set. We want to have, 15 passengers per hour. We don't need a 40-foot bus if it's only 6 passengers per hour. So we're not going to have the bus, our limited, resources there. But you don't want to leave all those people behind. So microtransit, in my way, is a way to help improve equity and inclusion. So when you're focusing your heaviest assets on your highest used routes, you're not leaving Mrs. Smith at her house when she needs to get to the health department or get to her bridge game Tuesday night or whatever she wants to do. Now she doesn't have to walk 2 or 3 blocks to get to it. She can have microtransit brought to her door. And so I think it's one more thread in that mobility mosaic, which will be part of our solution offering. It's nothing I think it's going to substitute for the big bus and the train, right? But they're going to focus now on real mass transit. And the microtransit options will fit in wherever else. And as we make a priority out of things like equity inclusion, where it's not just about, um, it's the conundrum that transit agencies have had, coverage versus, I forget the other one, but, the two questions.
Frequency, coverage, and frequency.
That's it. Coverage and frequency. Yeah, back and forth. This rope that pulls. Well, maybe you can do all of that if you layer in microtransit as a safety net on top. But it has to be, it can't just be like a cheap taxi cab, right? Or a cheap Uber that's subsidized. I don't have to call Uber now, or I do call Uber, but I get it at half price. No, only if it takes you to the hub, like they do in PSTA, what Brad does down there, things like that. So finding the right solution for microtransit to feed your system to help serve areas that have never had service that need it now. The policymakers are saying we want to provide them some mobility, or substituting for places where mass transit, there's just not enough demand for it.
I love I think there's so much promise in that approach. I love the way you're thinking about this because you take any city with surrounding cities or towns, and you're obviously going to see some distribution of density of people and a distribution of demand. Where do people want to go to and from? All of that's changed throughout the pandemic. We talked about changing commuter patterns or non-existent commuter patterns in some cities. And then you think about, well, how do we maybe change the fixed route network, right? We have all these routes. We have a lot of cities have excess coverage today, but if we remove certain routes and focused on frequency, back to the coverage frequency trade-off, oftentimes what we've seen, and I'm sure you can name a million studies of this, is the more frequency you have, the more demand you induce. Which is great. One, you have higher ridership, but you also are generating more fare box revenue to potentially fund on-demand services to supplement the coverage. And so I think there's a tremendous amount of promise with that type of model. Obviously, it's still in the spaghetti throwing days of on demand, and we will see what sticks. But it does seem to make sense. I'm curious when you talk about throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks. What metrics do you look at to assess is on demand viable or not viable in a given city?
That's a really good question because obviously, if you're comparing it to your fixed route ridership uh, metrics that you're getting, passengers per hour, you're not going to get that on microtransit. So I think it's whatever you prioritize for it, which is why you got to plan it ahead of time, right? So if the goal is, it depends on what your goal is, right? It's the Cheshire Cat. So you go to a fork in the road and you see the Cheshire Cat, and she says to Alice in Wonderland, "Which way do you want to go? Which road do you want to choose?" And she says, "I don't know." And he says, "Where are you going?" She said, "I don't know." He said, "Well, then either road will get you there." So you have to know where you're going. You don't want to climb the ladder of success your whole life, only to at the end find it was leaning against the wrong wall. You want to make sure that you as an agency strategically map out what is it that we're here to accomplish. It's that reason d'etre thing that we've talked about. I've talked about probably in 50 different sessions I've spoke at in the last 6 months. What is our reason to exist? I think as transit agencies, our reason to exist is to provide access to all of life's opportunities. So, who doesn't have access right now? That's the first question. If your goal is to serve my city, and in my upcoming book on conversations on equity and inclusion that I've interviewed like 20 CEOs, it's one of the big questions. What are we here to do? Well, I think we've all figured out we're not here just to take commuters from A to B. We're also here to provide access to all of life's opportunities to everyone in my area. And so if there's pockets of areas that don't have access, I think that's what you're going to want to measure. You're going to want to figure out a metric which measures, are we providing access to, not just jobs, but all of life's opportunities to these people? And that may be where microtransit stands out. We've been able to provide access to 300 brand new, unduplicated passengers that we've never served in transit before. And that is, as a ratio of what we're trying to do, that's a success. So I think we have to decide up front what it is we're trying to do, then set a reasonable threshold for success, and then measure our iterative progress toward that goal. So cities, it's what Peter Rogoff said, right? You've seen one transit system, you've seen one transit system. I love that quote. I use that every week. Um, Leaving Sound Transit, we're going to miss him, but Julie's coming on board there. She's going to do an awesome job as replacing Julie Tim, my friend from Richmond. But it's a great quote, and it's really true. Every city is different, and what every city values is different. And so in one city, it may be they're looking for microtransit to solve one problem for them, getting people that don't have fixed route to hubs where they can then transfer onto buses or trains. Another city, it might be there's a food desert in this area. There's no way people can get to grocery stores by walking, but we don't have bus service there. So we want to get access from people to food. So every city, and even within a city, there'll be multiple reasons why you might want to try something like microtransit.
Great answer. And I love that quote, by the way. I'm totally going to use that. It is
Yeah,
so true. Every city's unique. Every city's different,
yeah,
different geographies, different interests, different political situations. It's just really unique. So it's part of, quite frankly, the fun of working with cities around the world. I'm sure you enjoy every bit of cherishing those differences as you're traveling around the world.
I do. Yeah.
Okay, we are going to shift now. Next topic, the infrastructure bill. So it's a very exciting time, obviously, working in the public transit industry. It's been a hard few years, but we also now have the largest federal investment in the industry in the history of the country. And it truly is a once in a generation opportunity to improve and potentially even rethink how public transit works and how it supports cities in the US. So you work with many cities. You travel around talking to leaders, and I'm curious, what do you think are the biggest areas in need of investment, and how do you see agencies starting to spend the new capital that's becoming available?
Yeah, good question. As you mentioned, in addition to the infrastructure, obviously it also included our once every 5 years Transportation Reauthorization Act. And in there was a 40% on average increase in things like 5307 funds, these formula funds. And so it is historic, not just in the capital side of things, but also in the operating dollars that'll be coming to agencies and opening up all kinds of competitive grant opportunities for people to try new and innovative things under, the leadership of Secretary Buttigieg and Administrator Nuria Fernandez, our friend, used to be head of VTA. So, I wear another hat, Johnny. I'm executive director of the North American Transit Alliance. Talk about the gig economy. I picked that up as a gig during the beginning of the pandemic, and they represent the six big contractors. So that's First Transit, Transdev, MV, Keolis, National Express, RATP Dev. And we have a lobbyist in DC, and we were working hard on that bill to make sure that it would benefit everyone who's serving in the transit industry, including contractors, that the funds could pass down to them. And we were successful in that. And as I got into that bill, I realized that this could do a number of things. One thing it could do is it could enable transit agencies to pilot new ideas, just what we were talking about today, which they are definitely doing that. We haven't had a lot of extra money. Everybody's been tight for cash because where ridership was and city contributions, and a lot of cities their fare box recovery ratios have dropped, from 30 to 25 to 20 to 15. And so the money wasn't coming in there. And so this gave a once in a generation opportunity to pilot some new ideas, which was great. That's one thing the money can be used for. Two is infrastructure improvement for transit systems. So this is, all the rail infrastructure, all the BRT lanes, all of the behind the scenes software and hardware technology that it takes for buses to do just what you and I were talking about earlier, which is, infotainment for people, right? Or apps and all the things. So this extra funding can allow transit agencies to really beef up the behind the scenes stuff that isn't sexy, but it has to be done. I remember Paul Wiedefeld, my
I
buddy
think
at
it's kind
Vermont.
of sexy, by the way. Some of
Yeah,
us do, but not
that's
everyone.
right. Yeah. Well, what is sexy is a brand new route, right? That politicians can come out and cut a ribbon on and say, "Hip hip hooray! Now we got another route to the airport." But behind the scenes, you've got to make sure that you don't have electrical charges jumping from one thing to another on the tracks, except where you want them to jump. And so that has to be invested in. So, and the third one in my mind is rail. Rail is a neglected mode in the United States. I've traveled all over Europe and Asia, and ridden high speed rail, real high speed rail, not like what we call our bullet train at 125 miles per hour. No, I mean maglev, baby. What we were trying to study here between Baltimore and Washington while I was here and still being studied. I just did a podcast episode with the head of that Baltimore Washington maglev thing. Just phenomenal, man. But I'm a big Amtrak guy. It's not just Joe that's a big Amtrak guy. I am too. And all of the rail around the country and what's happening down, even in private rail, like in Brightline trains in Florida and out maybe in Vegas to LA. To me, America needs to make a generational investment in rail. That is a long-term solution for inner city transportation between cities. It's also important in cities, right? We know the subways and the light rail and all that's important. But I'm also talking about the inner city rail so that people can get from one city to another. If we want to move to a car-free lifestyle, you can, a lot of cities, get around in that city riding transit. But what you can't do is get to your neighboring city. So you need a car to get out of your city. What if we had a really good rail network where you didn't have to have that, where you could hop on the rail? You could take a microtransit or bus down to a hub and get on the train and take the train, 75 miles to the next city because you want to watch the Baltimore Orioles play their game that night, then come back. You don't need your car. So to me, this rail investment does a lot of things, including bringing new people into ride and getting out of their car that hasn't happened before. So those are three of the ways I think that this once in a generation, bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is great. Both parties were in on it. It's helping our country move forward.
Yeah, I know. I won't get into politics, but the fact that it truly is bipartisan was just, I think, a huge win and certainly inspirational. Let's talk about fleet electrification. Obviously, a big emphasis is the environment, going green. I read every day in the news some new pilot or trial around transitioning fleets to electric vehicles. What are you seeing on that front?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm good friends with a lot of the people at Proterra, and actually have one of the guys on my podcast on a regular basis talking about kindness. Mike, uh, he doesn't talk about electric buses; he talks about kindness. But I've been engaged with them for quite a while, talking to them about the latest battery technology and how we can update it. So here's what I'm seeing, Johnny, in a nutshell. I've talked to maybe 6 to 8 CEOs in the last month or two about this topic specifically. And what I'm hearing is that um, supply chain issues and battery issues are causing people to say, in addition to not wanting to put all their eggs in one basket, are causing people to say, you know what? I don't think I want my whole fleet to be electric. I think I want my fleet to have an all of the above approach. So one CEO last week told me we're doing a lot with CNG, where compressed natural gas is available. That's a really good option. Others are doubling down on electric buses and saying, you know what, this is going to be, we don't want to have 3 different styles of vehicles here. It's difficult for our mechanics. We're going to just all new electric buses. That's another option. But a third one now that's coming on the scene in a big way is hydrogen. You know, Lauren Skyver, our friend at Sunline Transit, you know, was one of the pioneers in this and is starting the West Coast Center for Excellence where she's training people on doing it. And she's selling, I got to tour her hydrogen plant before the pandemic, right after APTA BMBG there in San Diego a few years ago. And it's phenomenal. And she's selling it now, not only, you know, but onto the market, not just for her own vehicles. And so those are the 3 big types of, and then of course you've got, you know, the hybrid option. And then you've got clean diesel, which is at the other end of the spectrum where we're getting away from dirty diesel to clean diesel. So, but pretty much everyone has made a decision that is involved in public transit, the great majority, that we are moving to zero emission or close to zero emission fueling for our vehicles long term. Like here in Maryland, the General Assembly passed a law, the state legislature, and said, hey, MTA, you're going to do this. And so policymakers are making the decision on the funding agencies, and then boards and CEOs have made that decision as well. So now it's incumbent upon us in the technology industry to make sure we provide the tools to transit agencies to plan out the routes effectively so we can see how many miles would an electric bus travel in the heat or in the cold where we're at. I got to plan that out effectively. And then once it's on the road, I got to manage that charge so that I don't leave passengers stranded. You know, because you know, even though battery power is doing great things, it may take a little while to charge it, and it may have a limitation on the mileage you can run that puppy during the day. You know, you may not be able to run it all day long like a diesel bus. It can pull in for a 10-minute fill up and then back on the road. So there's all these considerations to take into account, including this is what multiple people have told me on both coasts. They're concerned about power grid failures. They have, you know, problems with earthquakes, whatever, down on your coast. On my coast, it's storms like Hurricane Sandy that came up recently and knocked out power. And transit agencies don't want to be left stranded without power for their vehicles, especially when they're considered the emergency evacuation method for a lot of these cities. So I'm a big, strong proponent of electric buses. I'm, you know, 100% in favor of them. But this is what I'm seeing as we talk about what's happening in the industry. The industry is taking an all of the above approach, but moving toward the goal of zero emissions. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does, and certainly an exciting trend. But it kind of goes back to the on-demand discussion. There's a little bit of spaghetti throwing to see what will stick, and quite frankly, it might be different in each city. Each city is unique. Weather has a big impact on battery charging rates, on mileage. Obviously, cities with more hills or less hills will impact that too. And so, I suspect we'll see quite a bit of a mix across the industry for some time, but I'm just happy about the broader trend and really
Yeah.
excited about it to push towards greener fleets, either zero or close to zero emission.
Right. What we've got to do, though, is solve this supply chain problem. I mean, it is significantly impacting everybody. You know, they got buses on order for a long time out, 18 months maybe sometimes, you know. So that's a problem.
Big challenge, obviously impacting our industry and many others. We'll see how that unfolds in the months and years to come. I got a question for you about the infrastructure bill. If you could pick one area to invest the money in, what would you pick? And this is, I'll ask not under the lens of a single agency, but given your
Okay.
knowledge of the entire country, what's your one pick of the most valuable place to spend that money?
Yeah. So I always try to start with the end in mind, right? 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey. So what's our end? If our end is to provide access to all of life's opportunities to as many people as possible, and that's the be honest with you, that's my personal goal. My personal goal is to impact as many people as I can for good in my life. And I've chosen transportation as a way to do that. I think I'll be able to help a lot of people through this, hopefully. So I would try to spend that in the way that I could help the most people. So one way to do that would be to maybe create, you know, uh, I don't want to say nationalized public transportation because that's not what I'm trying to say, but having a national approach toward technology, toward infrastructure, so that Peter Rogoff's comment maybe isn't as true in the future as it is now. That there is some commonality among transit systems, and that they can communicate to each other when it comes to faring, when it comes to interoperability between systems that are right, like San Francisco, man. What, 26 different transportation providers in one city? Hey, how about we all figure out a way to communicate together, just like public safety is done? I was a county administrator, and I remember when we all were going to 800 megahertz radios, and we all were trying to have our 911 centers be able to communicate with each other. It was critical after 9/11 because because public agencies could communicate to each other, public safety. And so the same thing is happening now. So I think anything that would elevate the infrastructure and the technology of transit systems would be where I would spend it. And a close second would be rail. I'd love to see more money spent on high speed rail getting it done.
Uh, Both awesome. And I love your point around interoperability and connectivity. I think that is so important. And yeah, each city's unique, but that doesn't mean from a rider's perspective, we want to integrate or interface with 26, 27 different agencies, at least in the Bay Area. It needs to be
Yeah.
seamless. I was talking with Seamless Bay Area yesterday, actually, around some of the amazing work they're doing to drive some unification here. And I think it will be really impactful in the Bay Area and would love to see that taken more across the entire country. Okay,
Absolutely.
we're almost out of time. I want to go forward looking. You have such a strong perspective on the industry, everything, all the different areas where spaghetti's being thrown on the wall with experiments and everything we've been doing for the last several decades. That's really this core element of stability across public transit. If you were to think 5, 10, 20 years in the future, paint a picture. Like where do you think we can take the industry over time? And I love your perspective around starting with the end goal and trying to figure out, well, how do we impact more and more people? What do you think that looks like? What does the future look like, and what are the things we should be doing today to get there?
Yeah, that's good. So, the Western mind, Aristotle taught us the Western mind is wired to think in three. So I'll give you three visions of where I think the future is going. The first is equity and inclusion in our cities. I think transit agencies and the people that fund them and support them have realized that these agencies are vehicles already in place, pun intended, that can create more equity and inclusion in our communities. And so I think transit agencies are looking, like my friend Alex Wiggins does in New Orleans, looking at it all through the lens of equity and ensuring that people that need an extra hand up get it and they get an opportunity to experience all of life. And so I think transit agencies are going to be focused on that, and the services they provide. Like King County Metro, Terry White told me recently, the services he provides are going to be focused on providing more equity inclusion in their community. So we could have a shifting of the services we provide, of simple things like where bus shelters are located, things like that, out in the communities and not just in the downtown cities. So they're serving communities that maybe have been underserved in the past. In addition, the internal equity inclusion in transit agencies is a big change. I think we're going to see more people of color, more women. We've seen that over the last few years serve in the top jobs in our transit industry, which is a wonderful thing. We want our agencies and their boards to look like the communities they serve. Number two, I think we're going to see more autonomous vehicles integrated into our overall system. Like I mentioned in Dubai, Ahmad Barosian, the CEO there, told me in the current episode of Transit Unplugged TV that's running right now that by the end of 2023, he's going to have level 5 autonomous vehicles operating in the city. It'll be Cruise from GM. They'll be over there. They're after San Francisco, after your city. That's where they're going next, supposedly. They're mapping out the entire city this year of 2022, and then he's going to have real nobody in the car vehicles. And so I think in 5 to 10 years, that's when we'll see this starting to hit. Nat Ford down at Jacksonville Transit has that test and learn facility where they're testing and giving feedback to OEMs. It's coming to the point where we're going to start seeing them, in addition to seeing, I think, trucks at night in the right-hand lane with no driver, 3 or 4 trucks in a row, with all the products, going down the road. We'll see that in commercial. And on the bus side, we're going to see them fit into niches where they belong. Like I said, they're not going to do everything, but they will fit. So that's something that'll be very different. It'll be integrated. So I was able to visit 3, 4 years ago in Switzerland, the first autonomous vehicle that was integrated into the overall system. It's called Neuhausen, Switzerland, which is right at the Rhine Falls, Europe's biggest falls. And they're still doing it today, and they've learned lots of lessons, and other systems are doing it. That's number two. The third is zero emission. Just what you said. So cities are setting hard caps. I'll be in London in 2 months speaking with Andy Lord, the COO of TfL, Transport for London, for the podcast. And cities like London have set hard caps. They're saying, no more cars downtown in certain areas. A lot of cities are doing that. We're going to have certain limits on, the particulates in the air. And so transit systems hopefully will be past this, this whole pandemic induced and whatever is causing all these problems we're having with the supply chain. We'll be past that, and we'll be able to pump out zero emission buses. And we're going to see fleets 50% or more with zero emission, which will change the dynamic of what it means to be a mechanic. Now it's going to be more like a IT professional. No, these will be high tech people sitting behind their laptops. Maintaining our vehicles in high technology ways, with all the data that comes from that as well. And so, equity, autonomous, and zero emission are three big improvements I think that we'll see in the transit world in the next 5 to 10 years.
You certainly paint a compelling picture, and I'm excited for that future. And I'm excited, actually, while we're at different companies, we can build that together.
Yes.
It's a really fun time. And again, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. This was so much fun. You are just a wealth of knowledge. You have so much wisdom. You talk to so many different agencies. It's insane how many examples you can bring up. And this was just a ton of fun. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was an honor. Thank you, Jonny.